Well, good morning. We are back in the studio, and today I'm doing a blog post with a twist. So I'll have a video up about how I create my watercolor flowers, the easier ones, and it's because my mom asked me about it. So that's why I'm sharing this with you, and you'll be surprised about the paper I'm using, and I'll meet you on the other side and see how we get to playing with just a few colors and water to create beautiful soft roses. Okay, see you there. Good morning. I'm back from my walk, and as you can see, my puffer jacket sleeves are still sticking out as the house is very cold. Okay, what we have here are two postcards. One is 140 GSM and the other one 300 GSM, and both are from Montmartre. Next up, I have an Etcher Lab square block that is 50% cotton. In it, I have done quite a few pieces of work, torn out some, and what's in here I haven't scanned and vectorized yet. So I'll just quickly page through and let you have a look. Now this one is an A4 size, and I'll reveal what it is at the end. But let's have a look at what we are doing today. The page, more elements, and this page is just a play with two colors. I'm going to work in this book and at the back of one of the older drawings just to show you this demo today. So for this we'll need some water, and I'll use a flat student grade acrylic brush. First off, we'll draw a circle almost like a donut, but not with the circle hole in the middle. Have it slightly off center. I'm just going to grab a color I worked with yesterday that is on my palette, and that is purple. You can take a significant amount of paint. Make sure there is paint on the brush because we're only going to work in the center for now. With the sharp edge or the point of this flat brush, we are going to draw out small little center marks that look like plates or C shapes, but stretched out like a crescent moon. The smaller ones are in the middle and larger ones spread out to the edges, where you'll see it touching the water and then dispersing into the water. Now remember, watercolor likes rivers. They like to flow towards the river or towards the watery edge. Next, all you have to do is stop. Just leave the watercolor, leave the pigment, leave the water alone, stop fussing. We spend too much time scrubbing at the paper when you should actually put the paint in and leave it. You can add more water to help the pigment move, but don't fiddle with the pigment. Just let it settle. And while we're waiting, let's try another one. Again, drawing out the circle with a small opening in the middle that does not have any water. And also not centered in the middle, but somewhere in the middle, if you know what I mean. Another thing you can focus on is creating an uneven edge, because we don't want a donut looking flower. We want something that looks like petals and looks like a center from an angle. This time you can see that opening that has no water very clearly. Make sure you make quick, smooth movements, which means you'll have to have had to practice this quite a bit. So those smooth movements are done with the tip and move asymmetrically around that center to create variation, of course. And try not to take more pigment until the brush is empty, until it's run out of pigment. Now, it's not to say that your edge shouldn't have paint, but be very, very careful when you're trying to make petals to not concentrate all the pigment in every leaf. We want variation within the flower and within each petal. Now, by giving you this information as is, without prior explanation of the techniques, I'm assuming that you already use watercolor, because this is not a watercolor tutorial on how to use watercolor. This is just a little video to show you how I paint watercolor roses. This time I'm making one starting from the center with concentrated paint and not doing it inside a donut. Now this is slightly more difficult because as long as there's paint on the brush, obviously that edge is going to be a hard edge or a solid edge. And unless you stop yourself to grab some water or rinse off that brush to give you a soft edge, you'll probably keep on building this rose and there won't be delicate play with softer, less pigmented edges. So you really have to catch yourself here and be aware of lightening this edge by adding that river or adding the water. Now this is real time, and I want you to notice just how slowly I am working, because I'm thinking while I'm brushing with the paint and the brush, so that I do exactly what I intend to do. This is not a half-hearted splash of paint on the paper. This is thought through, thinking through the watercolor steps. What results do I want? Soft edge, hard edge, and how much water I'm using and where the water is. Am I moving towards it? Very methodical way of thinking, but also not too logical. It's just a matter of, do you want it soft? So you add water. Do you want a hard edge that's more prominent? Then add more pigment. I'm quickly going to dry this off because that is secret number 2. Is you have to let it dry completely before adding consecutive layers. Okay, I'm back and I brought with a few things from the studio. So there's the dried page, and in my hand I have a very old sketchbook that I made, and I dedicated this to florals, and I started it in 2018. Now these ones were some of my very first roses, and I'm kind of embarrassed to show this, but I want you to understand that we do develop our own style as time goes by. And yes, the roses do get better and better as I go through this book, because I actually packed it away and it was in a container. And when we unpacked, when we moved to sale, I continued into this book, and this is what results came about in 3 years of practice. So this isn't my only sketchbook. I have multiple sketchbooks, and my technique has improved, as you can see, from 2018 up until 2021. Now we are in 2022 now, which means yet again I have improved. And that is the beauty of having sketchbooks. If you can track your progress at all times. Okay, so here is the watercolor palette I used for today's project. and it's also the same one we use in the play and paint classes. Okay, so let's see, second layer. I'm wetting that brush a little bit. Let's work with this one, and purple, just taking a little bit of paint, and I'll draw out those center petals just a little bit using the edge of the brush, and adding more pigment, brushing until it's gone, but very controlled and meticulous, making those little petal shapes, some thicker, some thinner, trying to capture the essence of a rose, not necessarily drawing from reference, just blending out there with some water, taking water, and now I'm going to add in a second color. So waking up that palette, making sure some color does end up on the brush, and tipping it into that newly wetted surface. Just a little bit, you don't need a lot. Rinse out the brush and blend out those new paint edges. Okay. This time we'll take purple again and just start in the center with a brand new rose, making those little cup and saucer shapes. This time adding water again and softening out those edges to create delicate petals at the edges. Again, make some angles and shapes. And this time I'm directly going to add the secondary color and make petal shapes while everything is wet. So this is in one go, and you can try this technique if you want. I'm just showing you what is possible. And again, these are more like practice pieces. These aren't final pieces at all. Okay, this time I'll take more paint and begin in the center again, making jagged edges and those moon shapes or saucer shapes, and this time adding more of an angle to them by using several edges of that flat brush, using water again to blend them out and creating soft edges. Now sometimes this color is very subtle at the edges, but you can still see it. There's a remarkable difference between the center and the edge, and for this edge I am going to use green. Well, why not? You can literally add any of the secondary colors. Just be mindful that a yellow will neutralize purple and give you a muddy brownish gray. It won't be a true gray or a true neutral. Okay, let's try a bud this time, and buds are very pigmented or concentrated in the color. It's as if the buds hold the color for the whole flower. And just make that stroke and let it be. Don't fiddle with it. Make a mark with the water brush, with the brush, and let the water do what it needs to do. Okay, let's try a leaf or two, because roses need leaves. I know you can't really see what I'm doing down there because I didn't know what the camera was catching. But while it's wet, I'm just going to add a line of purple to give that leaf another color. And with roses, you'll always have several leaves. And for that one, again, the green, and then a concentrated green for the center. Okay, I think by now I realize that we can't see, so we moved the book a bit and added more leaves on another rose. And make them random, don't make perfect teardrop shapes. Leaves are variegated and have edges and are specific to each species of floral plant. This time I tipped in some pink, way too much and concentrated, so I'm just removing some of it to see what we can get there. Along with that, I just grabbed my blotting towel just to make sure I can get rid of some of that color by adding water and picking it up again, adding more green to try and get rid of that extra pink I put in there. Okay, so I'm looking at this now and wondering what else I can show you. So maybe we can add some colors here and there. Try not to overdo it or to overwork each of those roses. Now you can see which of these techniques would work best for you, as I tried a variety of techniques on this sketchbook page. Let's try and do something on one of these postcards. Now I picked up the 140 GSM one, and let's try a bright orange. I think this one is actually called gamboge yellow, and do the same by starting in the center, making those C shapes or moon shapes with different edges of the brush, and adding water to wash it out to the edge. You can see how the pigment runs towards the water when you start adding the color. Okay, and make the petals uneven and jagged and weird. Can you hear the cat next to me? She's grooming herself while lying on the chair. It's like, over the couch, it's like the two of us have the same favorite spot. Okay, so a leaf, again, uneven shape, uneven edges, and in a set of 3 for this side at least. Make them different sizes and just play a little bit. Just some soft details, not too overdone, and you'll have a little bit of fun today. Like I said, these are for practice and for play and experimenting. And isn't that what play is about, is figuring out what works. I encourage you to play and figure out what you like. These can become things, but in the process you learned and discovered how you can make roses. It doesn't have to be exactly the way I make them, it's how it works for you. So try and play and experiment and use the colors. Here I'm just adding the exact same color, a little bit more concentrated. Now some of that water has already started to evaporate, so the pigment doesn't disperse as well, which means I've learned something. And when you work with your paint and your paper and the brushes you have, you'll also discover this isn't a fixed scenario, because even the heat in the room or the lack of heat in the room can influence the way the water dries and therefore influence the way the pigment moves. All depends on the environment, your tools and techniques. But do try and experiment with different things, therefore developing your style along the way and figuring out how you can create this loose watercolor rose. This area below I'm going to use to carve out a outer edge or parameters for the petals, and using just the green that I've already wet with a little bit of blue that was next to it, I'm using the background to carve out the petals. This is another way you can create contrast, definition, and also reveal the shape of your petals. Now, the color doesn't have to be uniform, especially for a background, simply because there will always be things hidden in the back, like petals and other branches or half of another rose or something sticking out. So all I'm going to do next is add a few leaves in here while it's still wet, because I don't want it to look like actual carved out leaves. I want them to look like they are blending away in the background, but creating contrast. And that's all I'm trying to show now, is a contrasting color. Also going to darken up that inside center quite significantly by taking a very concentrated amount of pigment, adding it into that center and slightly blending it out. So here is the brush I used, and it's just an art, I know it says art advanced, but it's still a student grade acrylic brush. And look at how that color is playing and how the water dispersed the pigment. And all of it is just experimentation and play. So I encourage you to also play. And before I reveal what book this is, let me show you the roses I created for the Anso Designs logo. And this is not a watercolor sketchbook. It is in fact a creative artist collection drawing pad with 150 GSM drawing paper that is nowhere near watercolor grade quality, not even student grade. So when you can control your water and you can control your pigment, you can create roses in a multitude of ways. Now, I never want you to worry about the type of paper. It's about the practice. I know watercolor needs watercolor paper, but what you need is not the best paper, not the best paint, not the best techniques. What you need is practice. And without practice, no amount of good paper or supplies or tools will ever get you there, because we each need to develop our own style, and you only get to do that by practicing. It's like cooking food or doing gardening. The first time is always hard, and once you get to practice, you'll learn how to make things work for you. We each have our own techniques and abilities, and that is what makes all our art individual. We can all make roses, but your roses will look totally different to mine. And when you start making them continuously and they begin to look like your style, that is when you'll be satisfied. All right. So thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye, and keep on practicing. Bye. And remember to watch this movie, not movie, video next. Happy painting.